Hello and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We're back again to talk more TNA wrestling shenanigans. And I just kind of thought of something that I kind of wanted to talk about for a while, and that is dealing with like a roster. Now, what in the sense I mean by that is like when you've got your young talent and your booking and whatnot, when you bring in another talent from WWE or an older talent from somewhere else that has a very big name, like from someone from AEW or somebody even from TNA perhaps, you cannot just focus on that new shiny toy. Of course, you've got to focus on your new shiny toy. You cannot forget about your new shiny toy, of course. This is one of those things. You need to use that new shiny toy to help elevate the rest of your wrestlers that you have already had. You have to bring your already like younger talent or whatever else that you have, or semi-main event talent and like main event talent into feuds and into rivalries with those new talent. You cannot forget about your old talent as much, well, even if they're young talent, but talent that you've had already, essentially, I guess. You cannot forget about those talent. You have to be able to manage and give everyone not equal, because you can't always give everyone equal amount of time, but you have to give them an adequate amount of time every single week. At least try to. And if not that, then you have to at least try to give them, adequate time during a month-long build to the next show, especially people that are holding or have held some sort of title in the company. It's one of those things that you've got to bring somebody in, and like when they brought Christian Cage in, they did a great job with Christian Cage. But they had a lot of other wrestlers that they had there that they were already doing stuff with as well. And they didn't just forget about those other wrestlers. They brought along these other wrestlers to have feuds and matches with Christian Cage. Same with Kurt Angle. They brought Kurt Angle in. And that works well for both parties. It works well for the person that's coming in, because they're now going to go, okay, when Kurt Angle come in, he can now work with Samoa Joe, and now he can work with AJ Styles, and he can work with Sting. He can work with all of these people that are on that roster that he's never wrestled with before. And every one of those matches that he's going to have, even if he's going to have multiple matches with some of these people over, several years or whatever it was that he was there, didn't matter, because they were still really good matches every single time. And, they were still getting to that point of trying to push some of these guys into that more main event picture at around that time, especially Samoa Joe and that. But, and that was good for Samoa Joe, because, he needed to be pushed up to that level where people were like, no, he truly belongs at that level. People felt like he is probably going to be at that level, but he needed extra competition in a way so that it made people feel like, holy crap, when he's going nose to nose with somebody like Kurt Angle, who had been like one of the top guys in WWE, and you could easily present him as one of the top guys in TNA as well, that he felt on par with that it made it that both of them feel more important as well, because now Kurt is wrestling somebody that, is coming up to his level sort of thing, and they're both bringing out the best in each other. Same with AJ Styles, Sting, and others that he wrestled at that time. They just didn't forget about those other guys. Plus, they had their younger guys like Jay Lethal and some other people here and there and whatever else get their sneaky little victories or whatever else it was, or upper hands or whatever else it was, throughout the time that some of these other people were there. That Kurt Angle versus him match was very iconic. Versus Black Machismo Jay Lethal was very iconic. Biggest upset in TNA history, right, guys? But still, like, it's just one of those things. Even if he hadn't have won that match, which I don't think that he should have lost, but whatever, it wouldn't have mattered. He would have still got a really good rub because he would have been in there with Kurt Angle, and he would have showcased that, hey, I'm actually almost on the level of Kurt Angle, who was considered like almost a GOAT Hall of Famer at that point anyway. So you're like, at least in the ring, perhaps not like he wasn't quite there, or they hadn't quite featured him as well as what they should have done. And I agree, actually, like later on, they should have featured him bigger and better after that as well. But, like when he was feuding with AJ Styles and Ric Flair and stuff like that, they should have done more with him there and whatnot to develop him into that main event potential star. But, things happened and whatnot. That's when, like, they did sort of just, here's a person, and they're going to do stuff. Here's a shiny new toy. We might forget about them in a few weeks or whatever else it is. And we're going to forget about some of the people that are here. And we're going to forget about some of the feuds that we've just started. And, then we're going to have all these things happening and whatnot. You cannot forget about anyone. You have to, even maybe you can forget about some of the people that aren't really, on the radar for people a lot of the time, because, it's easy to forget those people, but you cannot forget them either, because you can go, okay, well, what's something else we can do with them? Because they're not connecting right now. They're not hitting right now, so it's time to go back to the drawing board with them and start going, okay, what can we do with this person? And that has to be sort of a collaborative process or a collaborative sort of thing. You have to sort of go back and forth and with the wrestler themselves sometimes and sort of go, okay, let's think about something. What can we do with you? What would work? Obviously, if you're a babyface, let's turn you heel to start with. What are we going to, if we turn you heel, what are we going to do with you? Then what's your character going to be more about or more based towards? That sort of thing. You cannot forget about anyone on your roster, even if they're floundering. That's the time to start going, okay, let's, try something else with them. Let's turn them heel, turn them babyface, do something else. Yes, it's one of those things of diminishing returns. If you go, well, is this heel turn working? I don't really know. We've kind of got to give it a little bit more time, type thing. You cannot just keep turning people back and forth between heel and babyface. People have seen that with the Big Show and whatnot. One of the biggest turncoat people ever in wrestling. You cannot keep turning people. You have to know, okay, this is what we're going to do with you for the next 6 months or the next year or whatever else it's going to be. This is where we're going to put you, And perhaps that is one of those things about saying will the fans actually sync up with it? Who knows? But it's just one of those things. If you continually post or push somebody in one direction for a fair while, then the audience has that, even if they're a bit of a bumbling stooge or whatever else it is, you can keep going in that direction of, no, they're a heel, they're aligned with these guys, and they're you could have some people be like, oh, we don't like him that much, or we don't think he's that great, sort of thing, or whatever. It's not their personal, favorite or whatever else it is, but you have to keep kind of doing the same thing. You have to keep them on one train. You can sort of start painting them a little bit differently outside of some of the people that are there in a faction or whatever else it is. Oh, I don't trust this guy or whatever else it is, or I don't like that guy, I think he's an idiot, or he never, does the job right, or whatever else it is, and that sort of thing. And that's fair criticism. They did that recently with the system, where, Eddie Edwards came out and said, hey, you lost and you lost and you lost, and whatnot, and that sort of thing. So, and I'm demanding that you guys, you have to be the best. We have to be winning and we have to be the best, because that's how we, how things work. If we're not like, and that's one of those, like, it's almost a meta call in some ways. You could keep the tag team or the faction together and keep kind of lying through your teeth to trust the system and all of this sort of stuff. But if you don't address the fact that they legitimately have lost throughout all of this stuff, then it's sort of like, well, they're just idiots, like, that are, not realizing, their own, like, continuity. Like, you've got to be kind of real at some points, because the fans noted that, Myers and JDC have, are basically, glorified jobbers, basically. They know that Moose recently lost, but that was like a fairly fluke-ish thing in some ways, in some regards. That wouldn't have happened normally, obviously. But eventually he would have lost somewhere down the line, and he will lose somewhere down the line and whatnot, and that sort of thing as well. So, still saying that kind of thing. And Eddie Edwards has lost here and there, but it's been a lot more rare, and they have sort of protected him a fair bit. So that is, like, a lot of people knew that he's more of a jobber to the stars sort of thing, and that sort of thing. So he's a little bit higher up on the pin list, I suppose. And that was one of those things with, like, with Moose. Like, he was another guy that was kind of like on that level of guys who you would think, oh yeah, he's a true star. He rarely loses, and if he does, there's obviously going to be something to it. That's where you've got something like this with, Eddie and that kind of calling everyone out, saying, hey, you lost and you lost and you lost and whatnot. Even though he's lost himself, but still his losses are a lot more rare and he's a lot more protected than what Myers and JDC are. So you can kind of weigh up the fact that, that is a natural part of his, position, and, the Moose thing's a little bit different. But again, still, you can still see that, they've lost and they've lost and they've lost and they've lost over the last year. And like last year, at the start of the year, they were really strong. They were a really strong unit up until about Slammiversary. That's when they started to sort of trail off and whatnot and that sort of thing. So, yeah, you have to have that for your current groups or your current guys. You've got to start going, okay, are we going to recognize, are we or aren't we, or what are we going to do here? Because they've lost and they've lost and they've lost. So we've got to change the dynamics. We cannot just keep doing the same thing, because people notice. And like, if we just keep denying the reality, then it's like, well, people are getting less and less invested type thing. They're invested in Moose because he's doing something big, but like, they're not invested in JDC or in Myers, really. And they're like a little bit less invested in Eddie. They're invested in Alicia and whatnot, because they're invested in some ways because they get the good heat, but they're not invested as far as when you see a match with them, you probably know they're going to lose, or if they're gonna lose, you know who's going to take the pin, which is either Myers or JDC 9 times out of 10. Like, unless they're doing a story or something like that, which is what they were trying to do with Jeff Hardy and Moose. They were trying to have a big money match between those two, which was the ladder match that they had, which was a big money match, I think. And I think that was kind of cool as well. So interesting to keep seeing these new little developments for your new guys. But when you've got a kind of new person coming in, and I think they're getting a few more new people coming in, a lot of NXT new NXT people, but they're not just like, and this is one of the best things they've done with the women's tag team division of late, is like they have gone, okay, let's figure out, putting these girls together and having them all fight together and each fight each other and whatnot. And I think it is building to a fatal 4-way tag team match of some sort. I feel like that's the ultimate goal there. But it is just, in some ways, it is just diversionary sort of stuff. That is using, but it is great because it is using your current talent, which is Spitfire and the Elegance duo, but you're also bringing in these new talent, but you're already, fixing them, to fight against the established talent and giving the established talent something to work with, but you're also giving the new talent something to work with at the same time. So that's like the perfect thing. You're giving all of these girls something to do. And that division, like we've talked about so much, has been crying out for more girls in that division, more teams in that division. And I've said like they should just, scrap it. But, if you're going to keep it, you've got to keep it, going. You've got to keep doing things. You cannot forget about it. Again, every division has to have this, where you're like, like maybe there's a few too many titles. I don't know. That's not up to me to 100% decide. Sometimes I think like just having too many tag titles is just too much, but whatever. That's me. I do think like there is a hierarchy, but it also depends on your roster. Like, again, like if you have a world title or the equivalent of a world title, i.e. your main event title for the men, you've got to have a main event or equivalent there for the women. So it's always weird with the X division, because I always think that the X division isn't a title that fits in a very specific place. It can fit almost anywhere and can fit anywhere, though it's usually an opening match style sort of title, or a match opening sort of style of wrestling, so that it is a big deal in a lot of ways. And it is an important title a lot of the time. The tag team titles can be the same sort of thing. I do feel like this is when when titles are at their best, though. When it feels like, hey, these titles, the tag titles or any other titles, could main event a show. It's like, given the right circumstances, it's like, yeah, that made sense and that worked and people were happy with it. Like Mustafa Ali and Chris Sabin, they main evented with the X Division title like a year ago, whatever it was. That worked. One of the three main, I think it was the last match. This was the last match. The Hardy's System ABC Trio ladder match. That was the main event, and that worked out. So that was cool. I can't remember what the third main event was, because it was Hendry and Nemeth, and I can't remember and the triple ladder match. Like, I can't remember the third one now. There was oh no, it was the women's match. Jordan versus Marsha, wasn't it? I think. So yeah. No, was that Slammiversary? No, that was it Bound for Glory? I don't remember now. It was something. Something happened. I remember. Don't remember. But yeah, no. I honestly think that they have that good perspective of, yes, some of you've got to win, some of you have got to lose, but like Tatum Paxley and Gigi, they lost this week. But in loss, they kind of lost in a little bit of a screwy way, and not too screwy, but a bit of a screwy way in some ways. But like, they got their revenge post-match by, smashing Ash into the cake. So that's giving them a little bit back, in terms of like legitimacy, kind of a little bit. not a lot, but still something, and you're giving them a character kind of moment, and it was kind of like expected that she'd go into the cake at some point, like last time. But this time she actually went into the cake, so it's like, yeah, you've fulfilled that, angle that was kind of there. But yeah, it's the same thing because you've got to keep the ball rolling, even if it feels like, oh man, well, does this really matter or whatever it is? And in some ways it doesn't. But, again, it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be something for that, division finally to be, showcased and to be, working and to be doing whatever they're doing out there to, at the end of the day, bring people in, entertain people, and do what they do. Get the butts in the seat and get the people to be entertained for the night. This is just another one of those things that will be like something people go, oh, okay, yep, I might check that out. I'll move over to Mace Warner and Sami Callihan. They're continuing on with their feud here, which is, whatever, but I don't care. Like, it is cool to keep working for both of those guys. So it's like, well, perhaps we don't have something specific planned up for Mace or Sami at the moment, but hey, well, actually, I shouldn't say that they don't have plans. I meant to say that, they don't have plans for either of them outside of this feud currently yet. They're probably got plans for them or whatnot for the future for both of them after this at some point, surely, because, you've got to have something for both of these guys to move on to. You can't just put, well, you could, but in my opinion, you can't just put Mace Warner in a world title match in the next, or after he's done fighting Callihan, whenever that is, which will be the next couple of pay-per-views, within the next couple of pay-per-views, either by or the end of Unbreakable or the end of Rebellion, one of those shows. Because at a certain point, it's like, well, there's nowhere left to go with this rivalry, and they both need to move on. So you need to give them both something else to do. But like, they have done what they have done thus far with both of them pretty well, and their feud is still continuing. It's not over yet, so there's not a huge way to judge like where they're both going to be at, whether they're going to still be using Callihan, maybe not, I don't know. I kind of feel like Callihan is sort of retiring almost. I don't know, dude. But it's like the dude has been doing a lot of very physical stuff, and if he is like, dude, it's too much, I want to just like sort of sit back a little bit more and sort of not take the time, but take more special bookings sort of thing, only really work sort of bigger matches or bigger pay-per-views or whatever else it is or whatnot. Not literally, but like if he's just like, yeah, I'm not going to put in as much effort, and people understand that too, or should, in my opinion, at least anyway. They should understand that you're not going to get many, at least, really awesome TV matches. Like, you're going to get some decent TV matches. You should always get decent TV matches, but you're you're rarely, if ever, going to get like something that is way, way, way out of the box, like, except for maybe the main event or maybe the opening match, sometimes here and there, like Will Ospreay and Josh Alexander. Like, it definitely was worth and probably needed to be on pay-per-view, but whatever, shit happens. But still, like, or at least like a couple of their matches should have been, but like the matches that they did have were still really good despite like the constraints that they kind of had to put them under because of the fact that this is, hey, you know, an episode of, you know, TV where we've only got however many minutes it is, but they gave them a lot of minutes, certainly, and they neglected a lot of, well, not neglected, but they neglected for that week perhaps some other stuff that they could have focused on, but they did that because they were like, well, this is such a big match, this is such a big moment, this is such a big thing and whatnot. It didn't translate really to anything, which is a bit sad, but that's just the state of you know, the TV station and the fact that again it was taped and whatnot and all of that. But still, it didn't really translate to a lot, except for like an arenas or whatever. But still, there was that, you know, kind of feeling of saying, right, you know, this is a big deal. We need to kind of move everything around so that we can make this do its thing. And maybe that's another perspective that we do need to take into account as well, because a lot of, as I've sort of said, like, it does feel like some of the pay-per-views are very jam-packed sometimes, and not everything kind of gets sometimes enough time to kind of sit and kind of, you know, be its own thing kind of thing. Like, there needs to be a little bit more, like, we need to focus on these 5, 6 things, whatever else it is. And those are our, like, matches that are, like, featured on this pay-per-view. If there's a big story or a big moment or a big match or a big angle, and again, like, when you've got these big angles, a lot of the time it does feel like, well, you can't have this big angle between some of these people and not be thinking, okay, this has got to lead to a title at some point or whatever else it is, because it's like, well, you've put all this time and investment into those guys, and it's like, well, if we're not elevating them up to being like grabbing a title at some point, it's like, well, what are you doing with them? Like, again, you know, but again, like, it does feel like sometimes the X Division title doesn't really have a lot of a great build. Sometimes it has a good build, sometimes, definitely, 100%. But other, like, some things, it's like, oh yeah, this is a big match. Like, just, like, it's a big match. Like, a big player, like Will Ospreay versus whoever has been the X Division champion, or whatever it has been, you know, for a while. That seems like a big money match. Like, obviously, but again, is it 100% necessary? And that's always, like, hard to sort of say yes or say no or whatever else it is, because it's like, well, without that, like I do think, like, the X Division is all like, you have to feature it in some way, I think, because it is just such a cornerstone of the company and whatnot. But I don't know whether you 100% have to have something that, like, is for the title. You could just have a little tournament or whatever it is or whatnot, or an Ultimate X, like, qualifier match or something like that that leads to a title shot next month or something like that. So you just do other little things, so it's not always all the same sort of thing type thing, and you kind of can save it and you can kind of build feuds up more naturally, I guess, over more time and things like that. You could obviously do these other things at other times as well, like, but doing them on TV feels like really bad. So it's like, well, you kind of need to save some of those bigger Ultimate X style matches or whatever else it is for major or at least, you know, a pay-per-view of some sort. But again, when it's like you have all these other matches and it's kind of like, yeah, that one doesn't really have much behind it, or this one doesn't have much behind it. This one's just a match, and it's like, oh yeah, that could be here or there, or it could be on TV next week, or it could be, somewhere else. Like, it's like, yeah, there's nothing behind this match. It's just two guys going up against each other. But again, like, they perhaps need that match to start telling a story over here, or to start telling a story over there, or whatever else it is. But sometimes it isn't. So it's just one of those things that it's like, we've got to have more stuff on there. And I don't think you need that all the time. I think, like, sometimes you need to have things on shows or whatever else it is, and sometimes you can just leave it off and say, okay, let's give every other match whatever, amount of time that we can that was going to be dedicated to these 2 or 3 other matches that we were going to put on, but we don't 100% need to put them on. Let's make the matches, the matches that we're having more quality matches, and let's really care and get into, like, these matches, that these 5 or 6 matches, whatever else it is. And it doesn't work for every show, but, like, concentrate on your matches as well. Don't forget about your major matches. Like, it is easy to sort of forget, like, you need more minor matches. Sometimes you need those cool down matches or whatnot still. But again, like, having matches that are nothing matches is, like, completely different. I think you cannot just have, well, not nothing matches, but nothing in terms of feud matches. Like, you cannot have those matches, like, unless there is something else majorly behind them. Like, this is a number one contenders match. There needs to be something on the line for people to give any reason or any care about it, or, like, there is a clear ranking system, or there is a clear, the Bound for Glory series, this is what you're doing. You're getting ahead, you're getting further in the tournament. Even if that's not that major, it's still like, at least you're doing something, at least you're telling a story, and this is going somewhere, and it has a destination. It's not just random matches go, like, or whatever. It's not just this guy versus this guy for no reason. Like, and again, like, some of these matches, like, you don't need to have, like, Kaz versus Steve Macklin on the pay-per-view, I don't think. Or, like, you could have that on the pre-show. That would have been fine. It doesn't really matter. But again, it's like, you didn't need to really have that on that show. Could have been on TV. Like, it didn't really matter. Like, that's one of those examples. It's a fine match, but it doesn't really, like, have enough to it to be on a pay-per-view. Perhaps just the timing of it was that they decided to have it on the pay-per-view or whatever it was, but they could have saved it and done other things and whatever else. So, but yeah, again, like, they might have wanted to put Kaz over on pay-per-view again, I guess, but still, it's just not, like, the most major thing that you need to do. Like, you don't need to do that, Plus, like, if you have taken that match off or put in it somewhere else, perhaps on the pre-show, like I said, or some of these other sorts of matches that are like that, put them on the pre-show, maybe that makes the pre-show a little bit more crowded or whatever else it is. But again, sometimes that pre-show does feel a little thin. But you've got to always keep everything in mind, and that's really tough as well. Like, so I applaud them for trying their best sometimes, and sometimes it's just like, let's do this now, because otherwise we've got to, waste an episode or a time, between now and this time, doing this or doing that or whatever else it is. I can get that is perhaps why that sort of thing sometimes happens. It's like, oh, let's toss this on pay-per-view or whatever it is. But again, it takes another 5 to 10, 15 minutes out of the show for those guys to do their match. And then that takes 5 to 10 minutes away from every other match, and when you have 2 or 3 of those matches that are just like, yeah, this is to set up something else or whatever else it is, it's like, yeah, that could have been at another time or another place, And again, I keep saying that Explosion needs more stuff. It really needs more stuff. So let's put it somewhere else. Let's, make that show a better show. Let's do something else. Let's get creative. Let's stop, doing the same thing and like, let's go outside of left field, or let's figure it out. Let's find the time to do these things. We always will have time to do these things at some point, so figure it out. You don't need to, You don't need to show every single thing every single time on TV. Like the most major, most important things should only be on TV. Still, same thing. Like that jobber match that Mace Warner had. Like again, I still don't think they should have put that on TV. They probably should have put the highlight or the end of the match on there, saying he won and showing that Callahan attacking him. That should have been shown. That's probably about it. But beyond that, it's like, well, why did we see that? And again, like seeing like the whole entrances of everyone sometimes is like, yeah, we don't really need to see that entrance like all the time. Like it's nice to see some people's entrances, but it's like you don't always need to see those long drawn out entrances or not even hear things like promos. Like I said before, put promos in at the time when they're having their entrances so that, yes, the audience at home might, or in the arena might not see or hear it, but the audience at home gets to see it. And again, put that on the Titantron, same thing. Like then the audience in the studio or in the building can hear it or see it as well, and they get the full context. So again, just doing those little things, because it's just noise. People like, yeah, it's great music, woo, and people love Joe Hendry's, but like everyone else's music, it's there, it exists, type thing, and we've heard it a million times at this point. So it's like, well, at a certain point, let's do something else. Let's make sure that we're giving, filling the space with more things, not like let's put this interview there or here or whatever it is that's taking up time. Put it underneath something that's already taking time. But yeah, like you've got to fill every second. You've got to find time for so much stuff. And that's the thing. Like that's why, like again, having Explosion being a better show, having showcasing more stuff, even some of the more minor stuff would be better. Because again, at least like there is that place for those extremely diehard people that would go out of their way to see it, and maybe you'll see more stuff there anyway and whatnot. But again, keep the more major stuff for TV, and even the more major stuff for pay-per-view. Again, they're sort of saving this match between Macklin and EY. Like, why not sort of tell a little bit more of a story? Slow down. Let's wait a minute. Let's not fully go for it this week. Let's not go for it that week. Let's, do something this week that tells a little bit of the story, and then a little bit more of the story next week, and a little bit more of the story next week, and then keep going like that. Let's let it simmer for a few weeks. Let's let them do something else and do something else and do something else, and then we'll come back to it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more here and a little bit more there, and then you finally get to see them doing something, and finally they're going to clash after that, and then they're at the next show. So that's one of those things. It's like slowing down with some things, saying, okay, this is not the priority. Why is this thing over here hasn't been the priority for a while. Let's give them some shine and give them some time, the Knockouts Tag Team division. So that's fair enough. I understand that. It's still not like where it should be, but again, it's just one of those things. But again, it's not going to be the ultimate focus, but still like giving them some stuff to work with, since you haven't given them so much to work with so long. I give you a thumbs up for that. But again, knowing when to kind of pull the trigger and when something's important enough to kind of justify its position in a show, or say, you know what, let's save that for the next show or whatever else it is. Let's have the Hardys have a random match on TV or whatever else it is that builds up to another match. It's not happening this month or whatever else it is. It's happening next month, but we're going to start telling that story slowly over the next few weeks, and then we're going to culminate, in a few more weeks. Same with the Hardys. They're getting older and they can't do as much, so save them for the big shows, save them for the most important events, save the older talent for those bigger events and those bigger spots. They're kind of doing that with EY, like I kind of said, which is good. Like, you need to do that with those guys because they just, like, they can't go every single, like, week and do that. And not even every single month. They should be saying, okay, let's do something. And then when I get the opportunity once a month or once every 2 months, maybe I have a big time match. Some other guys need to have more time, more exposure, more to do because they're new and younger, and you should be utilizing them more so that they can sort of carry, a certain portion of what's going on. The good hands, I keep going, they're a tag team, but they've kind of forgot that they're a tag team. They need to work as a tag team sometimes. Same with like Sinner and Saint or whatever, the Northern Armory now, I guess. Like they've had one tag match, I think, recently. So it is interesting to start seeing them, back in that role. It'd be good to see them back in that role. Um, you know, that's what you kind of got to do with those guys. You've got to use them as the quote unquote human meat shields, type thing. And yes, some are usually those matches that aren't, 10 out of 10 or whatever else it is. It isn't the main part of the feud or whatever else it is. They are somewhat more fodder matches, but they're at least more major story tipping points or turning points or things that do deserve to probably be on TV and will be good enough to be on TV as far as a match is concerned, not to be like on the seashell or whatever else it is. That's for like those jobber style matches or whatever else it is. You could have comedy style matches. I think that people forget how good a comedy match can be, and you can have comedy things, but it's just one of those things that you need to know what you're doing with it, type thing. But yeah, those are some thoughts that I just had, and I thought were kind of like a thing that I really wanted to talk about. And I've kind of touched on some of these things here and there before, because I've said like like when you bring in a legacy talent or whatever else it is, like they brought in Nick Nemeth or whatever else it is, or they brought in Sting, or they brought in some of these legacy talents. Like some legacy talents, you might say Christian was a legacy talent in some ways. I don't really know. I think like you can make that argument, but still he had a lot of potential. He was still really young at the time. So he could still rise up the ranks a little bit more, and he never really had been culminated to the main event status before that. So they did that. Kurt Angle was kind of a legacy act, but again, they still brought him along that main event tier and kept him in that picture and kept him relevant. But what I'm saying is you need to keep those guys, sort of doing that. You like, but you can't just do that. Like you've got to do every little bit for every little person. Even the ones that aren't really getting anywhere. Like you've got to give them chances after chances and say, okay, let's try something. Like I said before, let's try something else. Let's try something else. Let's try something else. You've got to keep trying to throw stuff at the wall, until something sticks, type thing. And you do have to give things time to breathe and time to sort of settle. You can't just keep saying, oh, let's change direction. Let's change direction. Let's change direction. Like you've got to know, okay, let's give this a few weeks. Let's give this a few months. Let's see where this goes. Let's, even if the crowd is slowly turning somebody babyface or slowly turning somebody heel or whatever else it is, you've kind of got to keep going along that, like, are they good? Are they bad? Sort of dance, kind of thing. Even though if the audience has fully turned somebody like babyface, like when they turned Stone Cold's babyface, pretty much, it was like he was already pretty much babyface. Bret was sort of turning heel, but the ultimate deciding moment was, going too far in the submission match and whatnot, type thing, and Stone Cold's resilience and whatnot. So again, Like that, like, and people forget this. That was sort of like, Stone Cold's sort of coming out party. He'd been around for a while and done some stuff at that time, but he was still a fairly new talent to WWE, realistically. Like, especially as his Stone Cold character. So they were trying to build him up and, push him to that main event sort of picture level and make people believe that he could be one of the next, top guys. And arguably, I think, like, after that, he was. I know I often think, like, it's crazy. They could have avoided the Montreal Screwjob by, doing a number of different things, but, shit happens and whatnot. So, but still, and I agree with some things that have been said about, like, Brett not wanting to do business or whatever else it is and saying, oh, just vacate the belt or whatever else it is and that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, but the traditional way is to, lose it or whatever else it is. But, like, they should have had, something else. They could have had a million different things. They could have worked it out in a million different ways. They could have said, oh, let's have a house match, here in Canada, and you're going to lose it to Owen or something. Do that. Like, I don't think that makes 100% sense, or you're going to lose it to Stone Cold, but then we're going to vacate it or whatever else it is and blah, blah, blah. In like a screwy finish. Like, but yeah, like he's going to pin you or whatever else it is. But it's going to be like a screwy finish in some ways. So then we'll vacate it or whatever, and then we're going to go from there. Or again, I don't know. They could have said he vacated it or whatever it was, and, they could have just said, give us the belt now or whatever else it is, and we're going to give you a replica or whatever else it is, and, or whatever it is. Like they could have done a million different things. And they should have, again, talked to Brett and said, hey, this is our fear or this is our issue. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But again, you've got to have that in your mindset type thing of like that's what sort of happened with PCO. They kind of dropped the ball with him and his title run and kind of forgot about him. Yes, like he didn't show up for some tapings and whatnot as well, but they also just didn't do him a lot of favors at times in that run. They didn't do a lot of favors to AJ Francis in his run as digital media champion. They didn't really do a lot of favors to Laredo Kid in his digital media title run. And right now they're not doing a lot of favors for Steph and for Mace in their digital, quote-unquote, digital title run. And I think Steph's amazing, and I think she'd be she's really good on social media and whatnot. And I think, she could be a really good digital media champion. I think that they're actually they're going to scrap that title. But I think it's the one, and I've heard a lot of people say, every time that they've tried to come up with some other type of title or whatever else it is, they've failed at doing it. And in some ways, yeah, they have, but this was the best one, or almost the best one. I think the TV title could have worked as well if they had gave it more time and kept it relevant and kept it going and that sort of thing. That could have worked. So the digital media title, I think it could still have worked. But again, it kind of, they kind of dropped the ball with it at a certain point, and it's you can't forget about defending that title, whatever else it is. You have to keep defending it, even if you say, we want them to defend it here or there, or we don't have any concrete plans or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Give them something to work with. You've got a bunch of other people that are there on your roster And it's like, what are they doing? Like, as well. So give them something to do as well. So I'm not just saying positive things here and there. I'll give a few negatives there as well. But those were just the thoughts of saying, you've got to always have, this ebb and flow kind of thing. You like I said before, when you bring in like legacy talent, you have to use them as fast as possible, like in the role that they're going to be, because their shelf life is getting shorter and shorter and shorter by the month, by the week, by the year. So they've got to have their top tier run as soon as you basically get them, because you don't know if you're going to get only 1 year out of them or only like 6 months out of them or whatever else it is. So you're only going to have them, but you're only going to have them for a short period of time at that level. But you've also got to have those young stars coming along, trickling along, and, being able to, challenge those bigger stars, because, again, you cannot rely on those older stars for a long time. You need those older stars to put over the new stars and that sort of thing. So that's the way it goes. It does suck sometimes, but, you have to realize, well, we've got to use this person to their full potential and get as much out of them as quickly as possible, and then we've got to move on to the next thing. And maybe we can keep doing some stuff with them while they're in, like, the semi-main event sort of scene, and then we'll move them down into the sort of the more semi-mid-card sort of status, and maybe that's probably where we'll finish up with them, or maybe we'll give them one last big hurrah main event run or whatever else it is. But it does depend on who it is and how they're working out, or not working out, but like working out how their fitness and ability to work in the ring is going. You can't just put people out there that can't work and can't deliver out there in the ring. It's fine to have people that are just there to talk, like your managers and whatnot, or your mouth sticks or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, you need to remember that those guys also serve a purpose, much like Jimmy Hart. A lot of the time, those guys have to be involved in the match. They have to take some bumps and whatnot from the wrestlers, especially when it's the heel manager, which is not the norm, and that. So you've got to remember, hey, these guys aren't just here to be mouthpieces. They are, but they've got to be, getting their comeuppance at times and whatever else it is. Like the Iceman of the the concierge, he's there to be the manager. They don't 100% need the mouthpiece that much, but it kind of works kind of well. And, he's there to get the heat and to take his lumps when needed, So again, but yeah, same thing with older guys. You got to bring them in, and people expect, hey, you've just brought in a big guy for the next few months. We expect big things out of them, So, and again, like once you get them, it's like, well, we don't know how long they're, especially once we start featuring them, WWE or AEW or whoever else is going to come calling and say, hey, we'll offer you twice as much money to come and work for us, or to come back and work for us, or whatever else it is. We were wrong. You're amazing. Let's go. Let's do something, So they might well do that. So you've got to remind yourself, okay, this is a short-lived thing. We don't know how long, not just physically, but just in terms of contractual-wise, hey, they might get a better offer. And we might try to say, hey, well, who's behind that? Kind of us, so could you give us a few more months or whatever else it is, or give us another consideration? We're not going to lowball you. We're going to keep you in a, continue to keep you in a position as long as you can deliver and whatnot, and that sort of thing. We'll treat you well, blah, 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 that sort of thing. So that's, I think, where you've got to be at with most wrestlers. That's where they're kind of at with Nick Nemeth right now. They brought him in. They've given him a big time like run at the top. Now they're kind of settling him in to do some other stuff, and continue to see what they can get out of him and how long they can keep hold of him for, and what they're ultimately going to do with him and all of that. So yeah, but anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and I hope you guys will join me again in another one.